is Kennard Vernon Stewart podcasting again, talking about the Auburn Tigers. Before we go any further, I want each and every one of you to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. And as always, it's great to be an Auburn Tiger, War Eagle. Been a pretty long, distracting, noise-filled week among the Auburn fan base and a lot of the activity that has been going on regarding the athletic program. Got folks leaving, got folks decommitting, and that all of a sudden spells a little doom and gloom. But, you know, that stuff is what it is. That stuff is outside of your control. There's no need to place blame. At least that's my opinion. War Eagle. So, Auburn's got a big one this weekend against Texas A&M. Texas A&M comes into the football game as the 5th-ranked team in the country, the number 2 team in the SEC West. The only team that Texas A&M has lost to is the team that everybody else beats too, which is Alabama. I think they lost that game 58-24. One thing about it, Texas A&M has, just like Auburn has, they got an old guy on the team that's been around for quite some time, and that's Kellen Mond. And Kellen Mond has been, widely inconsistent. One week, he has the absolute game of his life. The next week, he stinks it up pretty bad. As a matter of fact, last week against LSU, Texas A&M won in spite of Kellen Mond. You know, not playing well, not throwing the football well. 11 completions off of 34 attempts. I mean, that's pretty rough, especially considering one of the most, if not the most seasoned quarterback in the SEC at the moment. Bo Nix is actually beating him by about 300 yards, which is really not, at least from public perception, really not a huge compliment. So Texas A&M comes into Auburn. It's an 11 a.m. game. This is actually the 3rd time that these two teams have played at 11 a.m. One time in College Station. This will actually be the 2nd time in Jordan-Hare Stadium. The last time Texas A&M made the trip over to Auburn, looked like Texas A&M was going to actually beat Auburn. Auburn was in the midst, season-wise, in probably one of the biggest downslide in Gus Malzahn's career, having lost to Mississippi State, having lost to Tennessee. Defense was playing abysmal, giving up about 450 yards per game. During this particular time, also, the defense also gave up a gang of first downs, like 22 first downs per game. And the offense was actually pretty non-productive as well. But something happened. Something happened in the Texas A&M game that changed the whole trajectory of that season and probably stopped an epic downslide. Because if you talk about losing to Texas A&M, you're talking about a guaranteed loss to Georgia, which Auburn did lose to Georgia that week, 27-10. That would have been a complete disaster for Gus Malzahn and probably could have spelled doom for his career. I think Auburn might have been willing to even pay the buyout if Auburn loses out. And their only win down the stretch is to a FBS squad in Liberty. And that would have been absolutely terrible. Now, because Auburn beat Texas A&M in 2018, turns out it salvaged the season. Auburn actually went into the game against Georgia ranked somehow, but lost that game 27-10. Now, fast forward. Actually, let's go back a little bit further in this Texas A&M Auburn rivalry. Now, usually, it used to be a situation where the home team was the team that got beat. Now it's a situation where we don't know what's going to happen because Auburn has actually beat Texas A&M 3 times straight, 2017, 2018, 2019. Auburn actually lost at home against Texas A&M 29-16 back in 2016 when Auburn just could absolutely get nothing going. As a matter of fact, if I remember right, John Franklin III was the only player that could really get the offense going to some degree. And by the time he was placed in the football game was already basically over. So, also rewinding back to the 2012 season. Now, Auburn was coming off one of the worst performances schedule-wise, maybe even in history. Lost an epic 9 SEC games, no wins, 3-9 on the year. Had to go into overtime with Southwestern. I think it was Louisiana Monroe. Beat them in overtime, embarrassingly, 31-28. I was pretty much done with the season after Auburn lost to LSU, 12-10 in that year. But then, my goodness, this was actually a game that I just didn't bother to watch. Texas A&M takes on Auburn. Texas A&M's, I believe, first trip to Auburn. When I saw the final score, I was like, holy shit. Man, we lost to Texas A&M 63-21. Mind you, now, Johnny Manziel, Heisman Trophy winner of that year, showed his ass against Auburn in that game. I thought that was an epic. When you talk about this series, that's a game that really stands out to me. The next game that stands out, a year later, 2013, Gus Malzahn's first year, Auburn started to kind of see some light offensively in the second half of the LSU game. Really did some great things in that second half. Auburn actually sets up an epic matchup with Tennessee. Auburn comes into the game number 24 in the country. Texas A&M comes into the game number 7 in the country. Now, I kind of had mixed feelings because Texas A&M had actually whooped Auburn the year before, 63-21, so I still got that in the back of my mind. Still don't know what to think of Nick Marshall at this point, but this was the game. This was the game where Auburn started to bring it together, where Auburn actually found what works for them, and that was the RPO, lethal with Nick Marshall and Trey Mason. I thought that was an incredible football game. Auburn continued to fight, even though it seemed like Texas A&M was going to take control of that game in the first half. That was arguably, still to this day, one of my favorite Auburn football games to watch. Fast forward, 2020. Texas A&M comes into Auburn as a 4-point underdog, a crazy over-under. And when you think about it, neither team has done a great job of scoring this year. Texas A&M averaging about 31 points per game, Auburn at 26 points per game. The defenses are a little okay. Both defenses are okay. They're both inconsistent. They both have a tendency to give up explosive plays, and that's something that we're going to talk about in the prediction show. Now, a couple of things that stand out to me when it comes to the Texas A&M football team. You talk about Isaiah Spiller. I don't know, I always say CJ. It reminds me of the guy that played for Clemson, I think. But either way, Isaiah Spiller. Isaiah Spiller was the freshman running back for Texas A&M that started because of an injury. Early in the year, Texas A&M faced a lethal injury that really set them back offensively. I thought coming into that game, this running back was going to be a very huge factor in the outcome of Texas A&M's football season. As it turns out, because of the knee injury to Corbin, the running back from last year, I just really didn't know where Texas A&M was going to turn at this point. But Isaiah Spiller came in, he did the job, he was serviceable. You could tell, though, as a true freshman, he was not really in game Power 5 shape. He started to kind of get it going late in the season, but if you look at Isaiah Spiller this year, you can tell this young man has taken the time and he has worked out. I'm talking about he is explosive. He is the catalyst of this football team offensively. Over 700 yards and a very important piece to this offensive puzzle for Texas A&M, especially largely due to the inconsistent play of Kellen Mond. Now, on the defensive side of the field, I really like some of the things that I've seen on video footage from Texas A&M. When you talk about stats and all those types of things, they're very physical on defense. And that's something that was not really the case when A&M took over as being a part of the SEC West, having come from the Big 12 Conference. Their defense was not as physical. They just weren't good. When they first started as a football team in the SEC West, they just weren't a really good defensive football team. But now, they're really going out and recruiting some of the best, of the best. Some very physical, especially guys up front. I mean, the defensive front has become very impressive for Texas A&M here in recent times. So when I look at this team defensively, of course, they give up about 22 points per game, and that's kind of in the median, even with the inflation of the defense back in 2013, I think it was. That's kind of the median of what Texas A&M have tended to give up per year. Now, on defense, you got Buddy Johnson that actually leads the team in tackles. He has about 66 tackles, and he's a linebacker, really good linebacker, really physical linebacker, and he just look out for him in this particular football game. Also, another guy, some more guys you want to look at when you talk about this defense, Demani Richardson, Miles Jones, all of those guys have not only been active on defense, they've been opportunistic, has some interceptions, and they really make you earn your yards, especially in the middle and even in the they're very active. So Auburn, this is going to be a huge test for Auburn's offensive line. We're going to see how the injury-plagued Auburn offensive line will respond to probably one of the more physical defensive fronts in the conference. And it's gonna be a huge test. And whether Tank Bigsby will be able to go or not is going to be very important in this game, because Texas A&M, they're not the number 5 team for nothing. They don't do a lot of fancy stuff. They're not going to be able to put up a lot of points, but they're very physical, and they make opportunistic plays, and that could be a dangerous thing. Let me know what you think about this, guys. Auburn taking on Texas A&M this weekend in Jordan-Hare Stadium, an 11 a.m. kickoff, 12 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. Before you log off this video, if you didn't do it in the beginning, click the like or dislike button, click the share button, but most importantly, click the subscribe button and click the bell twice so that you don't miss any of the podcasts here on Vernon Speaks Sports Auburn. And as always, it's great to be an Auburn Tiger, War Eagle.